what we've got here is what to expect in the December points update. Now, of course, we've already looked at a little bit of an article that they posted about Genesis at YCS Bologna, which already mentioned a couple of things, but was mostly just a recap of the things that happened at YCS Bologna in Genesis format. And I've already looked at this and talked about it a little bit. Of course, I've talked a little bit about the power level of the format and then a couple of playstyles / cards that I'm not super fond of in Genesis format, even though, you know, as like the concept of the format is so good, but there's still a few things I want to be ironed out. However, I think it is worth mentioning that at this point, Genesis is still very, very new, very, very fresh, and basically still in like the very early stage. So there is still time for them to, you know, to fix these kind of things. So that's something that I really am looking forward to in this upcoming update, is how they handle the things that I think a lot of people are talking about at the moment with Genesis format. Because I think if they handle this stuff properly, Genesis format could really be a wonderful thing that I'm gonna be able to enjoy for a long time. So I'm really excited for what they have to say. As we mentioned in the Bologna recap, the next points update is scheduled for next week and will take Phantom Revenge into account, even though its official launch date was moved to the 19th for North America, 17th at Euro OTS. This is something that's worth talking about, because Phantom Revenge is already out in Europe, and in Europe at the moment these cards have 0 points, which basically means that they are probably pretty good in Genesis format. But yep. The next update will be based on the results and deck lists received from tournaments, starting with those at YCS Pittsburgh. Thank you to everyone who's been submitting deck lists. Keep them coming. Just so everyone knows, we do give strongest weight to complete submissions from tournaments, as in best of 3, where we see all the deck lists, since that's the most accurate way to compile complete census data on who's playing what, how often. But all the information is useful as we keep looking into what the heck everyone is building. Once again, adjustments fall into several categories. Okay, let's see. Several performance outliers. This includes cards both on a deck level and an individual level. For example, Dracotail's performance as a deck since October puts it in line for increases. And Jolin Lockbird's performance as an individual card puts it in line for an increase as well. More so in North America than in Europe, which is interesting. Okay, that is awesome to see. We've talked about this there's been a discussion about Jolin Lockbird. We're not going to have it again at this point. I'm happy to see this. I'm happy that they are acknowledging the fact that Jolin Lockbird is super, super popular. I will say, in my personal opinion, popularity is not the only thing that should matter when it comes to adjusting a certain card. In my opinion, Jolin Lockbird's popularity in Genesis format is essentially a result of an underlying issue, which is the fact that some decks in Genesis are doing way too much. And so I think if they adjust Jolin Lockbird, they should also account for that. You know, like if you remove Jolin Lockbird or make Jolin Lockbird more expensive to play, you have to worry about what's going to happen afterwards. You know, what's going to happen if Jolin Lockbird is no longer seeing play? What are those, you know, automat decks going to be able to do if they don't have to account for Jolin Lockbird anymore, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, Jolin Lockbird is also a card that's just not fun. So that's something that even beyond popularity, even if something can be popular but healthy, or it can be unpopular and unhealthy, in Jolin Lockbird's case, it's unfortunately popular and unhealthy. So yeah, I'm happy this is honestly one of the most important things about this entire update, is that they recognize Jolin Lockbird. Because that also eventually later down the line, this is going to lead to them being forced to hit certain decks harder. Because you can no longer just say like, oh, Onomat can exist because Jolin Lockbird exists. No, Jolin Lockbird is going to be more expensive, and then you also have to hit Onomat, which is good. Which is what I've been saying, you know, rip off the band-aid, you know, rip off the Jolin Lockbird band-aid, and then hit those decks that are too powerful if they don't get rolled. As always, this is the most important criteria and the fundamental principle of Genesis cards. Seeing excessive play see their costs go up, other cards come down while keeping OTKs boxed out. Well, like, I understand that that's the main thing, but like I just said, I think popularity alone is not the only factor, because I think people also play Genesis not only for, you know, for that reason, but also because of a certain type of gameplay that is being offered in Genesis. At least I can speak for myself when I say that. Like, I like Genesis because it has a certain like lower power level. So even if even if something can ruin my day in Genesis, even if it's not that popular, even if it's just a few people playing it, I think it can still mean that it's too powerful, whatever. But I mean, in terms of success rate, they are correct. Everything listed below is just part of our initial ongoing early access tuning. Once we exit early access, it'll be a bit different, and we'll be talking a lot about the long-term Genesis plans soon, and those plans are pretty extensive. I am very happy to hear that. Both, basically, I'm going to be very interested to read this, so I'm looking forward to it. And I'm also pretty happy to hear that they have pretty extensive plans with Genesis format. That is cool to hear. Doesn't mean anything yet because we don't know what the plans are, but that is something to look forward to for sure. To put it another way, everything listed below is going to be a performance outlier unless we hit it now. That's what early access is all about, setting up the initial points lists. Once we exit early access, the purely census approach will take over more. Although we will still need to assign some points to new cards right out of the gate, which isn't perfect. See branded below. Oh, they're adjusting branded again. Okay. Okay, what does this mean? It means that at the moment, they are still working out the baseline of the format, I guess, right? They're still trying to find out what exactly people playing Genesis format want the initial point list to look at, right? Like the cards that are already existing, basically. And I think that's fair. I think that's fair enough. And I think that's something that maybe in all the criticism that people post online, myself included, about Genesis format, one thing that's important to understand is that this is coming from a place of like love for this format. Like I am giving feedback on this format, both positive and negative, because I want this format to thrive, because I think it's an awesome idea. And so what they're saying is basically, you know, this is early access, right? So we are going to have to go back and forth on some things. And because you are getting such frequent updates, please bear with us, because, you know, there's a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and making a list of point values for every single Yu-Gi-Oh card is very hard. And I think that's fair enough, honestly. I think that is fair enough. I never expected Genesis format to be perfect right out of the gate. And I think it's unreasonable to expect such a thing with such a big project. So I've been happy with how things have been going, even though there is still cards that I'm like, you know, I've been saying, like, why is Rongo 31 points? Why is Drollin Lockbird in every single deck? And there are certain decks that are too powerful. Like, yes, those are issues with the format, but at the same time, it is a completely new format, and it's going to take some time for them to adjust all of this. So I'm willing to put up with it, basically. That's why I'm playing Genesis format. I'm still participating in Genesis very actively, because I see what they are trying to achieve with this format, and I really like the idea behind it. So even though I point out certain things that I want to change, I do really believe that this format, that they have something here. They have something that could succeed if they handle it properly. So basically, I'm giving feedback because you know, that's how they're gonna handle it properly if people give them feedback about it. So yeah, yes. All right, on to the categories. Also, of note, the categories are important because they're a guideline on things we need to watch out for in the future when assigning preliminary points to new sets before they come out. This is a whole nother topic, I guess, that we're going to have to talk about, is how are they going to adjust new strategies? Because realistically, if they don't put points on new decks, then everyone is just always going to be incentivized to play the new decks, because then, you know, you have a new deck, which by design is usually pretty powerful, right? But it also has no points in Genesis, so you can also play the best non-engine in it, which is just going to basically lead to a cycle of, well, every single pack that drops, you're just going to always basically be forced to play the newest decks if you are, if you want to compete, which is like, you know, like on the one hand, it's like, it was cool to see Radiant Typhoon seeing play in Genesis format, because it didn't have really much in going for it in the TCG, or in Advanced Constructed rather. So it was cool to have a place to play it, but arguably it would have probably also been a pretty good deck if they put some points on the Radiant Typhoon cards, right? Like arguably they are probably going to put points on Radiant Typhoon now, but I think that's a little too late, right? Because Radiant Typhoon could have easily been meta if like a couple of their cards had 5 or 10 points, because then the only thing, like, people played triple Pot of Greed in Radiant Typhoon, right? Because they really, the deck just didn't need any points, right? All right, first category, cards that attack the deck, the extra deck. We mentioned Runic last time, but this category also includes Hekahan's Gaigas, Hekahan's Xeno, Cool Toon Clip, and Cool Toon Q from Phantom Revenge, all of which proactively strike out or steal cards from the deck extra deck, so we're hitting them in advance. I see where they're coming from with this one. I'm not sure how I feel about this one in particular, because I think Hekahands and Cool Tune are two very good examples of two decks that are basically, I feel like at the moment, Genesis format was their best chance at seeing any play. Whereas in Advanced Constructed, it's not looking great for those decks as of now. They might get more support later down the line, but who knows? I'm happy to see, first of all, I'm happy to see that they're willing to assign points to new decks. I think that is good. Fundamentally, I think that is a good thing. I'm not sure if Cool Tune and Hekahands are the decks that are like, that need those hits. So like, just to put this into perspective, right? Like they didn't put any points on Radiant Typhoon when it came out, which is definitely a stronger deck than these two. At the same time, the reason they're hitting it, by the way, and I think that's important to look at here. The reason they're hitting these decks is not that because they are predicting them to be too powerful or too popular. They are hitting them because they feel like their play style is not as welcome in Genesis format, because the game plan is like, okay, we're gonna like take cards away from the opponent's strategy, which that part is subjective, I guess. You know, like I think resource management and messing with your opponent resources, I personally think that's a fine play style in Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't have a problem with it. But I do know, I mean, I've played Runic before. I see the comments I receive about Runic cards, okay? Like, I understand that there is a portion of the community who doesn't like playing against this sort of stuff, you know? Like, the random banishes from Runics or whatever. Like, some people still think that that's the reason why Runic is good, which that we're not going to get into that right now. I personally disagree that is a toxic strategy or whatever. I think Kashtira Unicorn is different because Kashtira Unicorn is targeted banish. Like that's definitely a little toxic, and it's also banish face down, which none of these cards do. But I think I get where they're coming from. I just wish they applied this logic to more other strategies, right? Because basically what they're saying is exactly what I said like a few minutes ago. They are hitting these cards because of their play style, not because of their power, not because of their predicted popularity, right? They're hitting them because they think the play style isn't fun, which is like, okay, fair enough. But I think they should also apply that to other decks, you know, because I personally, and you can let me know if you agree, but I would play against Hekahands 20 times in a row before I face a single Onomat deck or whatever else there might be in terms of like high ceiling auto win combo decks in Genesis format, right? So I think this logic, the logic is sound, but yeah, there's a line below. I know I'm gonna keep reading, don't worry. I know they're gonna hit Onomat, but like they're not hitting Onomat because necessarily they think the playstyle is not okay. They're hitting Onomat probably because it's popular. Cards that multiply excessively. Dodo Warrior is the poster card for this category. I mean, yeah, I guess fair enough. You know, I just wish there was a little more on the play style, but I'm happy to see Dodo Warrior getting the hit. I still think Rongo is the one, but let's read more. Cards that insulate turn 1 combos. Ooh, that's an important one. In Pittsburgh, players started gravitating en masse towards cards like Crossout Designator and Trap Tricks Rafflesia that help you force through your turn 1 combos even if your opponent has a way to respond. The price on these kinds of cards at the moment is a bit too much of a bargain for how much you stand to gain. Basically, the counters to the counters should be more expensive than the counters themselves. We might need to go into this more in another article. That is a very interesting bit of text here. Trap Tricks Rafflesia and Gravedigger's Trap Hole were a very common way for Onomat decks to specifically beat Droll Lockbird, which is interesting because here's the thing that I feel like is worth talking about a little bit. If you're gonna increase Droll and Lockbird's points, hopefully to a point where it's not in every single deck anymore, why does it matter that Traptrix Rafflesia gains points? Because let's think that through, right? Through. If Onomat only played Rafflesia to beat Droll and Lockbird, and you increase Droll and Lockbird's points, then why does Rafflesia really matter if the deck can still do crazy combos, right? I know there's other cards that Rafflesia can negate, like Ash Blossom or Nibiru, which I guess it depends, because from my perspective, Nibiru was also pretty popular. So I think at some point they are also going to increase Nibiru's points. As in a lot of decks, I feel like, at least the ones that I've been building, I've directly been comparing Droll and Lockbird to Nibiru. I was basically thinking they're the same price, and I was like, is Nib better in my deck, or is Droll better in my deck? I usually played Nib because I just think Nib is a more fun card to play with. But, you know, Nibiru I think is eventually going to get points, because now that Droll is going to be more expensive, I think more people are going to play Nib, because they were the same price before, so a lot of people prefer Droll. Traptrix Rafflesia with Gravedigger's Trapholes should have significant points, in my opinion. Traptrix Rafflesia is a very high quality Yu-Gi-Oh card, especially in the context of Genesis format. And playing through hand traps is just something that is relatively toxic. So I'm happy to see this one as well. So far, basically exclusively good news in this one, you know? Towers monsters. Monsters that are pretty much immune to other card effects. Likewise, we're going to crank up the costs of monsters like Lunalight Liger Dancer and Super Quantal Mech King Great Magnus, so that you have fewer points to give them generic backup. I think this is fine. I think the Towers playstyle in Genesis format has a place to exist, but they cannot be too powerful and too omnipresent. Noir, in my opinion, does not really need points, because you're asking about it, because Noir already basically, Pearly is very heavily hit in Genesis format. And basically the way Pearly is handled is also how decks like Super Quantal and Lunalight should be handled. You can play those decks, but you just don't have many points left over. I think that's okay. Because there is counterplay in Genesis format to those cards. You know, there's kaijus and there's other ways to beat them. Like you can play, like, I don't know, Destructive Daruma Karmic Cannon is a viable card in Genesis format that should probably have 0 points. I think at the moment it has like 5. But realistically, there are ways to beat these cards, and those cards are popular in Genesis format right now. Like kaijus, because of the kind of lower power nature of the format, kaijus are already pretty popular. And so if my opponent is playing a Lunalight or a Super Quantum deck, like, that's not the end of the world. But it's not okay that those decks basically have 100 points to spend on anything they want. So in my opinion, Lunalight Liger Dancer, I thought about this. I think Lunalight Liger Dancer should have at least 51 points, because that way you cannot summon 2. Because 2 is when it becomes really disgusting. 1, once again, 1 is already really hard to out. You need to draw a kaiju or you're gonna die next turn, which is already big enough of a problem. 2, you don't even beat with a kaiju, is the problem. And Lunalight still, even though the Pendulum monsters are not in the format, you can still make 2 Liger Dancers with a single Goat Leo. And I think that just shouldn't have a place in Genesis format. So if Lunalight Liger Dancer has 51 points, I think I'm pretty happy, because then you spend half of your points on the card, and you have way less points to spend, and you cannot play 2. I think that's a very elegant solution without killing Lunalight. You could still play Lunalight. Lunalight can still function even as like a blind second deck, by the way. Like you could still play blind second Lunalight, summon 1 Liger, and immediately win the game. Those are all still viable strategies, with like heavy poly being 0 points and stuff like that. So I think Lunalight is still a fine deck if it doesn't summon double Liger Dancer. And then Super Quantum, I guess same thing. They should have some points if they're... I played against a couple of Super Quants actually in Genesis format, and that deck seems to really have legs in that format. So I'm happy to see that they're acknowledging it. Readjusting extra deck monsters that get you another card. Oh, this is a category. All right. Separate from ones that cheat out another extra deck monster, these are ones that just get you another card in some way. Gaga Gaga Girl and Wind Up Carriers and Mighty are both cards in this category. I mean, yeah, I like to see this a lot as well. I mean, these two are just examples of cards that just make combos unnecessarily long and end boards unnecessarily strong if you just keep making monsters that summon more monsters and search more. Like, you know, I've been making that joke about Onomad. Like, the deck is just literally like summon level 4 monster, make rank 4 that summons more level 4, searches more level 4, specials more level 4, makes more rank 4. Right? That's just the play pattern of Onomad. And these are the kind of cards that facilitate this. So I think it seems like we're getting a combination of hits to the main deck engine in terms of Dodo Warrior, as well as hits to the extra deck for Gaga Gaga Girl. So even though they are not directly addressing the combo play style here in this article, they're not saying like, hey, there's some decks in Genesis format that are doing way too much like combo slop, and we want to tone that down a little bit because we want Genesis to be lower power level, which is what I would like to hear from them. The actions they're taking is still the right ones, so I'm happy to see it. Wind Up Carriers and Mighty, once again, Wind Up was not very popular. At the same time, you know, it's probably, it falls into the same category. It's the kind of thing where you don't always have to go by popularity. Sometimes a card is just dangerous to exist at too low point values, because if it sees play, it's gonna do crazy shit, and Zen Mighty is one of those cards for sure. Themes that weren't tempting. Last time we reduced the points on some themes that were popular internally but not externally. We'll do so again this time. Dragon Maid, Sword Soul, Tenny, Snake Eye, Ninjas again, and maybe Centurion and Six Samurai, although they are trickier. Okay, I think realistically, until Centurion, all of these archetypes can definitely lose some points in Genesis format. Six Samurai is a little tricky, I agree. Specifically, I mean, probably just Gateway should be at least 100. Maybe just Gateway 100 and the rest is whatever, but yeah. Reweighting some point distributions. An example of this is the adventure cards, where Rite of Aramasir and Water Enchantress are 5 each, while the Griffin Rider is 20. Okay, I mean, adventure doesn't see any play in Genesis, which I guess is surprising, because it is a pretty strong engine, but at the same time, if you want to play the full package, that is 3 Rite, 3 Enchantress for 30, plus Griffin, that's 50 points to play an adventure engine, and you don't even have Foolish Burial. So I think those could be a little less, even though they are enablers for like combo decks, but without Link monsters, maybe it's not as big of a deal. Gladiator Beasts and Crystron are also being looked at for this. A more high-profile case is Branded, where the Fallen and the Virtuous came out, and we figured everybody would want to play it in 3s, so we balanced things by putting points on the extra deck monsters. From what we're hearing, most Branded players would have been perfectly happy with just 1 or 2 copies of their new spell card, and would have preferred the extra deck costs to stay where they were, so we're going to make that correction. Okay, I guess the interesting part about the Fallen and the Virtuous is that it's also a very good generic card, which is kind of what I was looking forward to using it in Genesis format. Because, so to me it reads like, because this is reweighting and this is point distributions, right? This means like one half of the equation is going to go down, the other half is going to go up. To me, this reads like they're going to increase the points of the Fallen and the Virtuous, and they're going to reduce the points on the extra deck. Which, in my opinion, is a massive buff to Branded if they're really reducing some of the extra deck. Because Branded doesn't really need the Fallen and the Virtuous, right? Branded can just play without that card completely, or just play 1 copy like they're saying here. But if the extra deck gets way cheaper, then Branded gets way better. I guess as a non-Branded player, this is not great for me, because I would have liked to play the Fallen and the Virtuous in another deck as a 3-of with Albion in the extra deck. But that was already super expensive, and if the Fallen and the Virtuous gets more expensive, that's basically impossible. That sounds like something that could make Branded a real thing, maybe even too powerful, but I guess we'll see how exactly they do it. I'm sure they're aware that Branded is a really powerful strategy in general, especially in a Genesis environment, so they should be a little careful with reducing the points on Branded, but we'll see. This is an example of how when we hit cards before they're out, we might guess wrong sometimes, but we're happy to correct that with the next list. And I think that is good. I think this is good. I think they should put points on new cards more aggressively. And if they notice like, oh, we hit that too hard, then just go back down next time. I think that's better than a deck releasing and basically becoming like a tier 0 deck in Genesis format because it has no points, right? I think at least I personally would prefer if a deck was a little underpowered on release and then becomes stronger on the next update, than if it's completely overpowered and then they have to tone it down and we all have to deal with like, oh, 4 to 6 weeks of super broken, full power, whatever, right? Not like I hate Radiant Typhoon or anything, but I think Radiant Typhoon would have been a lot more fun to have in Genesis format if it wasn't so overpowered, right? It wasn't like the only best deck in the format or anything like that, but it was definitely overtuned. Generic housekeeping. There are several handy generic cards that almost no one uses at the current values that'll drop. We're also still figuring out how gradual to make these declines. If a card isn't played but then drops to 0, suddenly everyone would play 3 and then it just yo-yos back and forth. There's a sweet spot somewhere. The next update after this one will happen around the release of Burst Protocol. There are no official large-scale Genesis events between now and then, so the primary purpose of that update will be to add points to cards releasing in Burst Protocol and adjust other costs based on the addition of Burst Protocol. Okay. All things considered, this is a pretty nice announcement. I think like 95% of what's said here is definitely moving in the right direction. I'm not sure how I feel about Hecka Hands and Cool Tune specifically getting points on release. But like I said earlier, rather put some points on them and then if no one plays them, go down later. So I think that's okay. I'm okay with that too. Happy to see Droll and Lockbird being talked about. Super happy about the Onomat hits. Onomat at the moment, I mean, I've been repeating myself. Onomat at the moment is my by far least favorite deck to play against in Genesis format. I think it encapsulates everything I don't want to see in Yu-Gi-Oh! So like, I'm happy to see that we're talking about the main deck engine, as well as the extra deck, as well as Rafflesia to beat hand traps and so on and so forth. Especially with Droll and Lockbird getting more points, the Onomat deck needs to go. Couple of things that I would have liked to see a mention here. Rongo Miniat is not mentioned at all. Now, maybe with the, hopefully the death of Onomat Ryziel, or Onomat, just Onomat, no Ryziel. Hopefully with the death of Onomat, Rongo will go away. Still, I think like a 31-point Rongo is always a problem that's like looming over the format and could ruin it at any point. They did mention it in the previous post, but they didn't say it was going to get points. Also, we're not talking about Dimensional Fissure at all, which I think is kind of cringe. I think Dimensional Fissure is like... Dimensional Fissure goes against everything, like the entire philosophy of Genesis format. It just like kind of blows my mind that we're not talking about certain cards like... Dimensional Fissure, or also what's the other one? There's that counter trap that says like the opponent can't summon a Gravity Collapse, like those kind of things, right? Like, why are we not talking about those cards? You know, like there's so many floodgates on the Genesis list that are like 100 points because they recognize that that sort of playstyle isn't fun. But then why are we not even? Why are those 0 points? You know, Macro, Di-Fi, Gravity Collapse, Mistaken Arrest, whatever, you know, like, I just don't see a reason to have those cards at 0 points. Dimension Shifter as well, like at the moment it's not seeing as much play, but the card is just not fun, so why is it at 10 points? Why is there always a chance that someone decides to play a deck with Dimension Shifter and it just costs them 30 points to do so? Those are just some things that, like, even though some of them are being played right now, some of them aren't, I think it's just the kind of thing where like, it's just, they're just waiting to ruin a day for someone, right? So yeah, I would like to see that addressed at some point. Other than that, pretty happy with these. I'm looking forward to the update in, should be in a couple of days from now. It looks to be a pretty good one. And I mean, of course, maybe these changes are on there, right? Maybe these changes are on there and they just aren't talking about them yet. Maybe it's going to be a nice surprise to see cards like that go up. So we'll see. But nice.